Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. Long time no see, at least for me. I've taken a little break, but I wanted to hop on today and make kind of a mix of some of the videos I've made in the past, where basically I'm just making an unscripted video essay, because this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently and have a lot of current feelings about that I thought it would just make more sense to write a couple notes down and get it all out. So without further ado, what I've noticed recently in myself, at least, and the more I research, I've heard a lot of other people have felt this way as well, that I not only have been obsessed with post-apocalyptic media, and specifically like zombie apocalypse, post-apocalypse stuff. Like, I picked up Last of Us and Last of Us 2 for the first time, like, basically about a year ago, and I think I've finished the second game 7 or 8 times, which is a ton for me. And to fill that void after having played it so much, I went back and rewatched the first couple of seasons of Walking Dead, which I haven't done since middle school. Now that I have critical thinking skills, I can actually understand a lot more of what was going on, and it's a fascinating, wonderful, and really interesting character-driven show, at least for the first couple seasons. But I found myself not only being obsessed with these pieces of zombie post-apocalyptic media, I found myself being really comforted by them. And I think to a normal person that'd be odd, like, why are you comforted by this thing that's so depressing, so anxiety inducing, you're like always looking over your shoulder. And I realized how much it symbolizes to me the events of the pandemic and, where we are right now. And not only in the very obvious, infectious disease and governments we can't trust sort of way, but in a very just, feeling, vibe-centered way. And I noticed this first when I watched this really great video essay, I'll link it down below, about Last of Us Part 2. And he talks at the end about how he's never seen another piece of media that sort of captures better the anger and rage and confusion that come with becoming a young adult in the 21st century. And I felt that so much, and specifically the ways that I've been coming of age during and kind of post the pandemic. So today I've sort of grouped all these different things into 3 major ways that I've noticed connections between post-apocalyptic media and our own post-pandemic, and specifically how it's made me feel as someone who's been going through all of this, as I bet basically anyone in the world at this point can relate. So the first one is pretty much the most obvious one, which is that a lot of this post-apocalyptic media, and something like Last of Us, and in particular Last of Us Part 2, is that they're all just misery simulators. It's just like a big lump of wallowing in misery. And I think a lot of people can find that really disingenuous or pretentious or just kind of frustrating and unplayable, but I think was something to relate to, something to not specifically relate to, but understand myself and my rage through, and specifically in something active like a game where you're in combat. It's something that you can healthily and safely channel said rage through, and especially in a game that makes you so sensorily aware and has such a good understanding of character like The Last of Us Part 2, you really, at least I felt myself really taking on the rage that Ellie had and sort of combining it with my own and playing this character while I was playing the game. And a lot of zombie post-apocalyptic media has that sort of theme or trope of humans are the real monsters, I think we have certainly seen a lot of the worst of humanity come out during the pandemic. We've learned a lot more about so many different types of injustices and the ways that they've been perpetuated by systems that are working the best they've ever been because of the situations we're in. So I think kind of fundamentally what I mean here is that, like, when you feel really bad or when the world is in a really bad place, it can feel good to touch back on things that portray the world and portray the characters as feeling as miserable or way more miserable than you. Similar to listening to a really sad song when you feel really sad. I sort of feel like these worlds are like a shoulder to cry on, if that makes sense. Or like a world that you're crying with. You know, that sounds really emo, but just in the sense of, like, you know, so many environments in Last of Us Part 2 are these incredibly, like, large, dark, melancholic worlds, you know, to get yourself lost in. Like, especially the thing I think the most like that is the beach at the end. You know, I've like never seen another work that just so environmentally portrays the worst of humanity. So that actually segues nicely into my next point, which is this sort of relation of isolation and any of these sort of end-worlding measures, and the idea of nature taking itself back during societal collapse. Again, not only is that an obvious connection to the pandemic, because literally you were seeing air quality get better, you were seeing water get clearer, you know, when people were staying at home all the time because humans are the problem, you know what I mean? And so I think it's kind of cool to see this. It's, you know, on a very superficial level, it's really cool to see how all these various game designers or set designers or whatever can imagine that kind of cranked up to 11. And again, on a very superficial level, it's beautiful. You know, there's something I think really beautiful and powerful about seeing nature force its way back in, you know. I'll find the quote specifically and put it up, but there's a part in Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green where he talks a little bit about this sort of like nature taking itself back after humans are gone. And there's a specific quote about like how he hopes that one day moths will fly back, you know, only to the moon again without artificial light. And that's kind of what I mean here. Like, I think not only is it just beautiful on its face to see nature growing back over all this stuff, and that now we kind of know it's really accurate to how it would work in real life, but that there's sort of a larger metaphor of society being the bad thing that nature grows over, and that like our earth is being decimated by society, but there's something to bring life back through society's death. And a thing that I really enjoy about this, that I enjoy about a lot of post-apocalyptic media in general, is that it initially seems really sad, but the more you look at it, the more you think about it, it actually ultimately feels really hopeful and beautiful, that like the cycle of life, you know, things grow and they change, and we haven't fucked up so much for things to never be able to grow back. And I find that really beautiful. And just a tangential note with that, I think with the sort of liminal spaces craze we're all in these days, it's a really interesting type of uncanny to have these spaces made for people where there aren't people, and not only are there no people, but there haven't been for a long time. And so my last point is kind of an expansion of this, which is this sort of concept of rebuilding and these glimpses of these like utopian ideals, these like back to basics places, but have the knowledge of society and how it went wrong, trying to change that and actually being able to because they were able to start over. And I think that relates to the pandemic in the sense of like, we are trying to do that now, you know? we are criticizing and questioning so many facets of contemporary society, and I think a lot of people, and especially young people, are actually devising ways to start from square one. And one of those things that I'm noticing my generation being really interested in are things like mutual aid, things like homesteading. We're learning about the natural world, ways to preserve our environment and take from it just what we need, sustainability, and on a larger social scale, as I already sort of mentioned, we're really thinking about community and the ways that a community can actually help and take care of one another, rather than just being people that we live near or people that we go to school with or taxes that we pay or whatever. And so I think that's something that I've really appreciated, this sort of world building that comes from a lot of post-apocalyptic stuff. And fundamentally this hope for a better life in the worst of circumstances, and finding quote unquote the new normal. We see lots of different types of new societies in all of these different games and shows and whatever, and a lot of them end up being bad or having some fatal flaw, but they're just these little moments, the first couple of hours you spend just touring Jackson before all the shit goes down with Abby and Joel. And on the flip side, being able to see the WLF camp and just go and get a fucking burrito and talk to some lady about your soap, and watching, kids go to school and people pick apples and tend to sheep and play with dogs and read and joke and, just enjoy each other's company together, is something that, especially when it's being juxtaposed with all the insane horrors that you're seeing throughout this game, is something that's so simple and beautiful and is surprisingly attainable. And I find the same thing in The Walking Dead. Especially, I feel that's kind of what the second season are these is this group of people trying to learn how to start over, both in their personal lives and in their community, by having that knowledge from the past and having a, quote unquote blank slate. And I don't know, they're just little times that just feel so beautiful and hopeful and calm, Carl and Sophia doing schoolwork together in the forest, or Carl when he's feeding the chickens or whatever, or when they all get to have that nice dinner in Herschel's house, Amy and Andrea fishing at the end of season 1. That juxtaposition of seeing so much of the worst of humanity and seeing this calm, neutral, kind, helping humanity juxtaposed with it is just so powerful. And I think it kind of shows how the sort of real monsters are us trope is overplayed, and I like how people are trying for something better. Oh, and I haven't really mentioned Fallout in general throughout this, but I think obviously it kind of fits. And specifically the notion here of the settlements and the ways that you are literally rebuilding an area from scratch. You're going out and collecting chunks of materials and using them to build a whole area from scratch. And again, if you learn how to work the settlements correctly, it's all about mutual aid and community and helping people when they need it and having resources available for everyone, because everybody's lived through enough bullshit to know that any other way isn't helpful. It's cool that there's literally a game mechanic in Fallout that is this sort of concept of rebuilding and picking up the pieces, rising from the ashes and completely creating something new. My final weird little last tangent is how there's always the miracle baby. There's Jude, there's JJ, there's AJ. Also, I don't know why there are so many J's, but there's always the one child that was born during all the craziness.
Why do we want Carl to live in this world? so that he can see more people torn apart in front of him, so that he can be hungry and scared for however long he has before he, so that he can run and run and run and run, and then even if he survives, he ends up just another animal who doesn't know anything except to survive.
And pandemic babies, because pandemic babies are insane. They've been socialized weirdly. They are incredibly strong for some reason, and they too will have no knowledge of a world before whatever the fuck this shit is, and are sort of our only hope at this point for the change in our society. But will they step up to the plate? That's the question. But yeah, a sort of actual more serious note with that is, like, I think one of the major themes of The Last of Us Part 2, and even the first one, is this idea of the younger generation making radical change. And, like, will they do that through love and empathy, or will they continue to be corrupted by their elders', violent traditions? And I think that that's something that we, as young adults right now, post the pandemic, having this veil lifted for all of us, need to decide for ourselves. How are we going to make others aware of the injustices that are going on? How are we going to make changes in our families, in our communities? And fundamentally, where are we going to find hope? What are we going to hold on to? And what are we going to fight for? And I think those are all questions that all this sort of post-apocalyptic media really makes you confront, and specifically makes you confront in a time like this. All right, there you go. That was my video on our various post-apocalypses. And let me know if you relate to any of this in the comments. I'm curious to see if anybody else who is a young adult dealing with all of the, fallout from the pandemic, has sort of taken comfort in any of this stuff as well. Or if you can't watch stuff like this anymore, because I know that's true for some people also, just, as always, sound off in the comments. I'm very interested to hear what you guys have to say. But thank you guys for bearing with me while I tried this different type of video. I think it went pretty well. As always, if you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.